So mom lifts me up. I'm 6, almost 7, and holds me over the coffin so I can peek in at this prophet that's been murdered. And I'm looking everywhere for the hole in his head, which is so morbid when I think about it. And she's pointing, oh, it's right there, wherever, and there's makeup on it, whatever. That's where I met the prophet of the church, and the first time I ever experienced what would be the blood atonement and the trail of unaliving that would take place in the next 20 years. So I was constantly tormented thinking of what sin would I commit that would deserve the blood atonement. They had this terror bell that they would ring when the Herbalites had returned. We were all to run to the beach or ocean, sand dunes, and hide. We had all kinds of different little systems that we had to remember to keep everybody safe. My mom was in her 30s, early 30s, and I remember falling asleep several nights with her sitting in a fold-up chair in front of the window watching. I tried to just stay away from him. I don't remember him ever sleeping at my mom's house. Like, my mom never got a night like most polygamous families do. Dad had his home. He would pick up mom, and next thing I know, we were having another baby. But I didn't understand how that worked. And he had me spread my hands out wide as far as they could on the bed that goes over the cab of the truck. So it exposed my whole back. And then that's where he gave me my lashings. He told me I was going to get 15 of them. Obviously, I'd been bawling, probably screaming out, "Daddy, no more," in the first 3 or 4, He's down to 12. And he stops. I can hear that he's putting his belt back on. So then something in me broke. And I turned and looked at him. And I never as much as said anything but yes, sir, to my father. And I turned and looked at him and I said, "You lack 3 more."
Mine is the only voice.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Close to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you'd prefer to see our faces, you can go to YouTube at Close to Consciousness. The very, very best way to support this podcast, if you enjoy listening, is to interact with the post in any way, liking, sharing, of course, subscribing, hitting that bell so you don't miss the episodes, and leaving those words of encouragement for our guests mean so much to them. It boosts the algorithm. We love to read them. We also love when you add your own experiences in the comments. So thank you guys so much for being here. So today's guest, they reached out to us. She just released a book and I read the whole thing. It was incredible. There is so much to her story. And in our pre-call, she said, yeah, I had to take out most of it because my story was so long and there was so much to tell. So, of course, we're only going to get to a little bit of that today. Make sure to go and read her book if you are interested. We'll talk about that more. So, today's topic is polygamous Mormonism, but this time down in Mexico. We have talked about the Daughters of a Cult, if you've seen that documentary, the LeBaron group who was practicing blood atonement, and we'll talk about what that means. This is the other side of the story, the side of the group that was being murdered or offed by this group because of the blood atonement. So we're going to hear what it was like growing up in that type of environment, becoming a polygamous wife, one of 6, and how she escaped with her 9 children to the US and started a $1 million business. So thank you so much for joining us, Pamela Jones.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've been getting the chills just while you're introducing me. I can't imagine what's going to come together. But thank you for this opportunity.
Of course, and we have so much to talk about, even just your mother's story and how she ended up being the 3rd wife of 11, how you guys ended up in Mexico. There's so much to it. So if you could just give a brief introduction to the group, the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, right?
Correct. Yes.
So break off of Mormonism. How did we get there?
The Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, it was 5 original LeBaron brothers that evidently got excommunicated from the Mormon church for living polygamy back when they were doing the excommunicating of the families. So they moved into Mexico where they could, live freer and be able to continue raising their families and continue this belief. Actually, I think I heard of that there was like about 15 different groups that got started in Mexico that took their family via horse and buggy and went down there to continue raising their families. That's kind of how it started. And the LeBaron brothers founded a colony called Colonial LeBaron. And that's where it started. And my father, he wasn't obviously part of that part of the group. He was one of the Mormon children in Colonial Dublin, where he was born and raised. And my grandfather had 2 wives, and he had gone down to Mexico via horse and buggy to practice his religious beliefs. They were undergoing a lot of persecution, and he wanted just to be able to raise his family. So he went down there and continued raising the Jones family, which is where my father came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then my father ended up running into some of their pamphlets that the LeBaron brothers passed around, and that's how it started, how my father was introduced to the original 5 brothers and their church.
I think one of the most interesting parts of your parents' story is how your dad met his first wife, who was mainstream Mormon, and they were like, "No, you can't marry her because you want to practice polygamy." And he's like, "Okay, I won't do it." And then he went on to have 11 wives. I was like,
Mm,
"Dad,
get
what
the
were you?"
chills. Well, my father was the son of the first wife of my grandpa. And then my grandpa went on and married his second wife, and they received a lot of persecution for being the plig kids, is what they were called. And he struggled so much and suffered like the rejection that they went through when it was, they're in that age where they want to date the girls and get out there. They would just get rejected a lot because they were from the plig family. And he told me that my grandfather told him, well, if they don't let you date their daughters, you get those daughters in a motherly manner and see if they don't let you, which wasn't the best advice, I don't think. But fast forward, Dad went off to one of the conferences in Arizona and met his first wife. They fell in love, and her parents were not really happy because, he was from the polygamous family. But so they eloped and called back home, and they said, look, if you sign paperwork saying you'll never take on another wife and come back home and get married in the temple, we will give you permission. So that's what they did. And my father had no intention of marrying other women. So that's how it started. And then my father was an alcoholic, and he frequented bars, and he had a little appetite for women, and there was some promiscuity going on, and we called her Mom Velma. She really struggled with these habits of my father, and so I think that is why they went on to join the church and live polygamy. I don't have the exact story as to exactly how this happened, but I know my father's first girlfriend was 14. I know that was completely against anything Mom Velma would have ever tolerated, ever. She had such integrity. So I'm assuming that my father got in trouble, and she made him make right on that. And therefore, this 14-year-old turning 15 became his second wife. And then he went on to marry all the rest.
Yeah. So you mean by getting in trouble, getting her pregnant?
There's talk about that, but there's no proof. But yeah,
Yeah.
something along that line. He never dated a 14-year-old again. Mom Velma would never have allowed it. She was such an amazing woman. And therefore, I think that's how this all happened, is she just didn't know how to handle all this extracurriculum activity. And therefore, she got on her knees, and she felt like the answer was he was a polygamist at heart, and she needed to support him in that. And she had had all her children before my father ever went on to have the other 52 biological children that he fathered. But that's how it started.
Okay. And another interesting part of your story is the fact that, well, first you were born in Mexico, but taken back to California, and then you ended up moving down to California around, was it 8 or 9?
My father believed that every time one of his wives were pregnant, that it was cheaper if they went into Mexico and gave birth. So all of his wives would go into Mexico, which was only about 4 hours south of wherever we lived, whether it was Texas or if it was California, and go down and have the babies and then come back. So my mother lived in California, then went down and had me and came back. And then we turned around and moved into Mexico when I was 11, permanently.
11, right. So let's talk about Ervil LeBaron, who split off from his brothers and said, I am the true prophet. I am the one mighty and strong, which if you're familiar with Mormonism, that's a verse that a lot of these people use, these current prophets or offshoot prophets, to say, no, I'm the one the Book of Mormon was talking about. I'm the one with the true priesthood. So anyways, Ervil split off. He said, I'm the one mighty and strong. You guys need to follow me. And if you don't, I'm going to enact what is called blood atonement, which means Jesus's sacrifice was not enough. If you commit a sin, great enough. It's my job to slit your throat, spill your blood in this sacrificial way so that you can get to heaven. It's like, I'm doing you a favor because you're not repenting. And so he created a hit list and things just went haywire. So I want to hear from your perspective what it was like when these murders started happening.
When then unaliving started happening, well, I was only 6, just shy of being 7, when I remember seeing the prophet, which was Joe LeBaron, in his coffin. So that was the first time I ever met the prophet of the Church of the Firstborn of Fullness of Times. And he was in his coffin and had been unalived by his brother, Ervil. So that was the first experience we had of the blood atonement. And I was so young, I didn't understand it. And I remember asking my mom, I don't see where he got shot, Mommy. And in Mexico, if you know anything about Mexico, everything's more crude over there. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, you can open the newspaper and if they found someone dead somewhere, or however it was, they would take pictures of that and put it in the newspaper. So everything was just like, that's just the way it was. So mom lifts me up. I'm 6, almost 7, and holds me over the coffin so I can peek in at this prophet that's been murdered. And I'm looking everywhere for the hole in his head, which is so morbid when I think about it. And she's pointing, oh, it's right there, wherever, and there's makeup on it, whatever. That's where I met the prophet of the church, and the first time I ever experienced what would be the blood atonement and the trail of unaliving that would take place in the next, 20 years. So that's where it was first. And then the church itself would always allude to the fact that if you were rebellious or you did anything that was ungodly or committed sins and crimes or whatever, that would be a possibility. So the church itself would talk about it, but they never implemented it. But they did talk about it. So I kind of knew as a young age what the blood atonement meant. And I even remember hearing others say, if you loved your family and you truly believed in the gospel, you would want them to do the blood atonement, because then you would know that they could go into the celestial kingdom of God. So not only were the perpetrator or whoever was going to implement this kind of ritual could be, I want to say evil, but righteous or whatever, the family members, your family members that understood the gospel would want that for you because they loved you so much and wanted you to go into heaven. That was taught as a possibility. Sometimes I feel like it was like even something that they used to, well, when I married into the second half of the church, I'll say, they used that as a threat. You might be guilty of that. So as a little girl and as I grew, I always wondered what I did think bad thoughts. Would I get the blood atonement for that? Or I swore, so I was constantly tormented thinking of what sin would I commit that would deserve the blood atonement. So I always knew about that, though nobody I knew in the church, my father or anybody else, had ever done any of that except for this Ervil LeBaron. So therefore he was super feared. And then obviously he was in charge of the civil law of God in the church. And he wanted to force the people, and he had this whole plan, and no one would back him up. He got angry, and then he decided to break off. He started his new church. I'm not even sure what the name of it is. They started implementing the unalivings that took place in the cult and throughout the United States.
Right. So people can go and watch the documentary on Ervil's side and what was happening to get better idea of what was going on. And you can also look at the case of the Lafferty brothers. Under the Banner of Heaven is a good show that you can watch that is extremely accurate in its portrayal of the events that went on. Obviously, they're going to take a little bit of liberties because it's a narrative piece and not a documentary, but people were doing this into the 70s because this was something that was taught in the early days of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young about blood atonement. So it's not something that people just came up with and ran with. It's something that the original founders of the church did. And when I found this out as an ex-Mormon, I was like, I'm sorry, what now? I had no idea the literal bloody history of the church and how horrible it was and how it was creating more death and destruction amongst these groups who were trying to live the original ways of Mormonism. So you're a child and you're seeing this play out. And I mean, they came through your village with fire and burning down homes and trying to off everybody. They were only successful with 2 other people, though, right?
Correct. So when the raid on Los Molinos happened, I later, way later, and if you read my story, you'll see that my ex-husband married into that group. Way later, found out who all was involved in the raid, and they used the children, 13-year-old children and 12 and whatever, those ages, 17-year-old children, that they orchestrated them to throw the Molotov cocktails and using the shotguns and the guns that they used. They orchestrated the children to do this unaliving raid, and they burned down a lot of the buildings. And what their plan was is to burn one of the big homes or big buildings down, and then the townspeople would come to put that fire out, and then they opened fire. I did not live in Los Molinos at the time of the raid, even though I was born there, and I was the first girl born down there in that part of the church. There was a boy born a few months before me, but he died, so I'm the oldest one born down there. So when we went back to those funerals. And when I tell in my story about seeing all of the soldiers lining up the roads everywhere, and I'm really afraid of guns, and there was guns everywhere. My father took me down and showed me where one of the gentlemen lost his life, and it was a very gruesome experience. And there were still homes smoldering. So not only had they gone in and attacked the people, they burnt down their homes so that nobody could go back into their homes. And so whatever the Herbalites couldn't take with them when they moved out of town, they burned it on top of everything else.
Horrible. One of the moments in your book that got my stomach all up in knots was when your family moved to Los Molinos a couple years after it happened, and you're thinking, hold on, why are we moving into the town that was attacked before when we are still technically on the hit list and your dad was on the hit list? You're just a child. You're the oldest daughter of your mother's soon-to-be 11 children, and you're having to take care of all your younger siblings, and I thought you did a really good job of illustrating how you were basically a mother taking care of these tiny, tiny kids. What was that like?
I think we all have somewhere in our life where we get our, I'll say our story, where we get what we're going to do with our life. I don't know. It's a belief that I have. And I was 6 when I found out mine. And that was that I would be a perpetual mother. And in fact, I probably wouldn't even know how to treat you, but to treat you like a mom. I'll come on as a mommy and clean your little sleepers out of your eyes and make sure your refrigerator's full or whatever it is that I do. So for me, I had been a mom to my mother's children since I was almost 7. So just before Joel was unalived, I became a mom. So not physically, but I was the second mom for my mother, and she had to work, and I took care of 5 siblings younger than me. So that had always been expected of me. So when we went into Mexico, and now again, I wasn't allowed to go to school. I had to stay home and help wash, clean, and care for all of my mother's children. And we had never lived in Mexico, and it's a third world country. We're out in outhouses and then using well water, which is a hole in the ground, literally, and a bucket that goes down there, and you pull it hand over fist, pull it back out, and that's how we got all of our water. So it was really, really hard. And the reason my family moved into Mexico is because they were guilty of welfare fraud.
Oh.
And due to that, they were wanted. And so they left, which is a common thing from the colony, that they burn bridges in the United States. You know, they'll do businesses and not pay taxes. They'll milk the system as much as they can. And once they've done all that, then they run into Mexico. So you'll see that through the whole threads of the colony to this day, where that's just what they do. I know my father had his boys casing the streets and picking out cars that they would steal and take into Mexico. And it was just, they were just crooks. I'm sorry, I love my family. My father's passed, so I feel like I can tell the story now. But their belief was that they were God's chosen people and they lived above the law. So the reason we moved into Mexico back to that exact town where the raid had gone on is because they were wanted in the United States. So the whole family left. So there were a few steps ahead of the law of the land and a few steps ahead of verbal LeBaron as well.
Talk about anxiety, though. As a child, when your father had just taken you to the spot where someone was offed, and now you're living there and you have this responsibility of mothering your tiny young siblings. I mean, that must have just, you must have been on edge the whole time.
I was, and obviously, fast forwarding and now, I truly understand that I was raised and born into trauma, and that was just a norm. We lived in those kind of situations every day. They had this terror bell that they would ring when the Herbalites had returned. We were all to run to the beach or ocean, sand dunes, and hide. We had all kinds of different little systems that we had to remember to keep everybody safe. My mom was in her 30s, early 30s, and I remember falling asleep several nights with her sitting in a fold-up chair in front of the window watching to keep us safe. Eventually, my father they purchased some big equipment, and my father dug a trench all around the whole colony so that vehicles could not get in and get out. There was only one way to get in and one way to get out. And they set up the townspeople with guns to be able to protect those enter and exits to keep everybody safe. So the Herbalites never came back and dared to raid the colony again. There was different little things. My father got shot at a few times, but they were posted off the hill or further out. In some ways, we're a little safer, but mentally, everything's so scary. And my father and my mother had helped colonize Los Molinos, so they had brought in a lot of the natives from Puebla. So there was a lot of superstitions that came in with them as well. And I remember going to the funeral of the two young men that were unalived. And I had never heard such wailing in my life. Never, ever. Can't tell you how horrific it was on a little girl, seeing the mothers of these young men trying to jump in the hole where they were burying the young men, alongside. And they'd roll in the dirt. And the traditions were so different from what I had ever seen. It was just terror, to be honest. It was super hard.
Wow. Can we talk about your dad a little bit, the way that he treated you and your family? I know that was a huge part of why you ended up getting married so young.
Yes. So my father, as I mentioned earlier, was an alcoholic, and he also was a perfectionist, which that is hard to live with a perfectionist. I think he was just overwhelmed with such a big family, and he used fear techniques to keep us all in check. And some of the things he would do that didn't make it to my book were very, very abusive and very extreme. I think I've heard a few people tell me they compared it to waterboarding that you do to terrorists as to what my father put us little children through. He was super, super strict, very moody. You never know which daddy you were going to get. I didn't understand alcohol at the time, so I didn't know what that meant. I saw it, but I didn't understand it. For me personally, because I was so sensitive and just trying to be good enough, and trying to make it to heaven was my biggest goal. And my father's techniques were of fear. So I remember thinking of God with this big whip that had pieces of bone and glass at the end of the whip, and how he was going to whip me on my back because I was so evil, because maybe I didn't tell the truth or whatever it was. So I feel like I had a lot of trauma towards my father. When I was 2, you can't see it on my face now because I keep it covered, but he marked my face with, I guess, a slap of some sort and broke some vessel. So I have it almost looks like a hickey, to be honest, right under my eye that I received from my father when I was real little. I physically witnessed him extremely beating most of my siblings, like in extreme ways. So I was petrified of him. I tried to just stay away from him. I don't remember him ever sleeping at my mom's house. Like, my mom never got a night like most polygamous families do. Dad had his home, and then he would pick up mom, and next thing I know, we were having another baby. But I didn't understand how that worked. Yeah, he was never around, and I did everything I could to stay away from him because I was so afraid of him. He had a really strong, stout voice, and that's all it took I would almost pass out. I'd be so scared of him. And then, of course, I would try to keep my siblings safe from him as well. So on top of keeping me away from him, then I would do whatever it took to try to find ways to keep the kids from him, which sometimes I was able to do that, and other times I wasn't. But yeah, he was extremely unreasonable. I always believed that if the United States or any authorities knew what he was doing to the children, he would have lost all his kids.
Yeah, some of the instances you mentioned in your book just had me, oh, my stomach was turning and thinking, these poor kids. One of the moments specifically I remember is when you went to go get pine cones and you were trying to harvest the nuts. And I mean, you can tell the story.
Yes, so I think I was only 11 when we first got there. I turned 12, and we would harvest the pine nuts. We only went one time, but it's something more that the LeBaron family did a lot. So when I married into the father of my kids, he did that all the time I was married to him. But at this point, my father only did it this one and only year. So you go out and camp out in the Nevada mountains and you harvest the pine cones, and pine nuts are a luxury. They're very expensive. So my father took the whole family out there. I'd never seen pine nuts in my life. You pick the cones when they're green. That's how the season starts. And then eventually you graduate on to picking the dried cones. But at this point, they were green. We picked them. I still hadn't seen what a pine nut ever looked like. You lay the bushels out. They kind of dry. One of my younger brothers came running to the campsite with a handful of these little brown nuts. I didn't know what they were. And he was showing them to me. And I said, "Oh, bring me some," not even knowing where he'd gotten them, to be honest. Long story short, we were told we weren't to touch those nuts. And because I'd had my brother bring me some, my father got home, was extremely mad. He lined up all of us kids out by where the bushels were, started asking us all whatever we had done. And my little brother said, "Rena," which is my nickname, "Rena told me to bring her some." So my dad looked at me and said, "Is that true?" I said, "Yes." And then he proceeded to beat me in the head with his rake, with those garden rakes, not even a leaf rake. It was those heavier rakes. It was with the handle. Anyways, my mother was out washing the laundry, and I could see the terror in her face, but she didn't dare console me right then because she feared my father. So I went running back to the camp, and I had huge goose eggs all over the top of my head from that beating. And then he sent for me a few minutes later to come back. So I went back, and then he was going to whip all the kids that were in trouble for this. And when he got to me, he let me go because he had already beat me in the head. But my mom stayed up all night to make sure I didn't have a concussion. I didn't know what she was doing. I didn't understand it. And then, of course, my dad would always find a way to come and find us. And I felt guilty because he would bring up the scripture and he would tell me, "You see how you were lying, or I thought you were lying when I set the rule. And you said I must have been in the trailer when you set the rule." Well, I was just trying to tell him why I didn't hear the rule. And he was trying to tell me, "You're lying, because if you know you're in the trailer when I told you not to eat the nuts, then you heard me." Anyways, he justified that, which was fine and all. And told me about how the Lord hates liars and he's saving me from hell by this beating and yada yada. But yeah, I extremely feared my father.
I think that's one of the worst parts about this is the fact that he's justifying it with God, saying this is what God wants, because that adds a level of spiritual manipulation to a child of, oh, it's bigger than my dad, and it makes you think that it's okay because that's what God wants. It's not what your dad wants. And in reality, do you feel like your dad truly believed that's what God wanted him to do, or was he using it as an excuse to take out his anger?
I feel that my father was an alcoholic. He would go into those rages. I feel like he was extremely, extremely hard on himself. And I think he struggled to forgive himself for his stuff, whatever it was, whether it was going outside of the marriages or abusing or beating the children the way he did. So I think he used God to forgive himself. So after he'd have one of those rages, I think he would try to go through scripture and find a way to ease his conscience and to try to be able to sleep at night.
Justify.
Yep, I know he loved his kids. He wasn't evil, like went out to truly destroy us. He was trying to, in his silly little mind, or I shouldn't say it disrespectful, but in his mind, he was trying to get us all in heaven, according to him. And he figured if he was hard on us and, we took a beating from him, it would be easier than the beating we would get from the Lord, right? Which all of that, I know. It didn't take me long. I know a lot of people tell me, like, you justify what he did or you give him an out. No, I don't. I do see that it was horrific. The secret to my journey and to my book is questioning, or actually contemplating, like, what was it really? And I think that he actually was extremely hard on himself and very, very upset with his own self. And then he would take that out on his kids to
Yeah.
extreme that's not acceptable. But so to answer your question, I think he knew what he had done had been extreme, but he justified it in trying to see that that's what God's will was for his children.
And I think that's a very compassionate and healed take for you to have, that of being able to see his perspective and see the demons he was working with and how he was navigating his own issues. So, yeah, that is a very compassionate take. And I think, especially when you get through to the end of the book, of course, you can't tell your whole story, and I'm sure there's so much nuance, but I was like, wow, she really came full circle and was able to let go of a lot of that. And I don't want to get into it now because we will at the end, but I was very impressed at how you were able to basically go a 180 and forgive your father in ways. I think we need to mention the last time that this had happened in whatever detail you're comfortable with, because I think it's such a pivotal part of your story and why you chose to leave the house so young.
Just a teeny bit emotional. I'm sorry.
What is it that's making you emotional? Do you want to talk about it?
Well, when I think of that little girl, I think of this little 15-year-old who had lived her life the best she could, all the while trying to be good enough. Trying to, I only feel tender towards her then, not the woman I am now. I mean, but I look back at her and I see that all she wanted was to be good enough for God, And there was so many rules and this sometimes unreasonable things for a little girl to remember and keep straight and go every day, So I for a while there I used to think that my father had it out for me, only me, And then that's what a child's going to do. They make everything internal. It's about them. And I think that I felt that I was just not good enough. And I was really tall, big chested. I didn't match any of my sisters. People would say all the time, "Where'd you come from?" Though I look like my family. I look Jonesy. I was just, 5'11", and everybody's 5'2" and 5'4", and I'm taller than all my brothers, and this tall, lengthy, big chested blonde. And I always felt like I didn't belong. And so somehow internally I made it that I was the ugly duckling, or I was the one that deserved, all these hardships or whatever. And so as I'm going through life and trying to navigate being good enough and make it to heaven, that's all I wanted, was to make it to heaven, right? Be that good girl, live virtuous and all. And my father had married a 14-year-old, and I had a sister, half sister, that's just 10 months older than me. And she had gotten engaged at 14 and then married 3 weeks later. So here I am, 14, and I like someone, and my dad, now I see what he was doing, but then I'll just tell you the story from then. I couldn't understand why he didn't want me to have a boyfriend or fall in love or whatever. So he took me to his office and he told me I could not date, which doesn't sound like a big thing. I was 14. That's a great thing to say. But when you look at the way he did things, it felt personal, right? So I wasn't allowed to date, yada, yada, yada. I definitely wasn't allowed to date the Hispanics culture that we lived amongst. My family was racist. I was not to have anything to do with the Mexican men from around, which wasn't hard because I was so tall. They all came up to my shoulders, so that wasn't too hard. But anyway, so the father of my children comes around. He's half Hispanic, and I thought my dad would never let me date him. So my father gives me permission to get to know him, but we cannot have anything physical to do with each other. It's May, and we're off singing mañanitas to all the mothers in town, and David puts his arm around my waist. And one of my brothers saw that, and they reported it. So that made my father mad. So I'm out and about, and this was actually a traumatic thing because I think it didn't hit me until I wrote the book, actually what that was about. And I think that's what you kind of are going to hear, because it's hard for me to believe this, to be honest. But Mom Velma, as I talk about her, she's my dad's first wife. She was a jewel, and she had a lot of say and control over my father. I think the reason why we didn't have near the scars we could have had is because of her. She would not tolerate it. It was so funny because my voice is soft, And my dream is to speak in public, right? And my father tells me to get up in front of everybody and speak, and he wants to do a demonstration, and all they do is cry. And I know Mom Velma tells him, hey, Osmond, she's so tender. Don't pick on her. And here I am speaking in public, but I just think it's funny. But anyways, so she always defended us. So my father picks up his ton truck that's parked at her house and decides, I guess, to go find me. I'm down at the store and I see the ton truck coming down the road, and it's cut about 5 blocks away, but I can see it coming. And I know there's a knowing that he's coming for me, right? So I decide to go home a different way because I'm so scared of him. Anyways, long story short, sure enough, he pulls up. He has my mom inside there. I don't know what he's coming for me for. It could be anything, So he tells me to get in the truck. He drives me out to the salt flats, which is a mile away from the town. And even that, how calculated that was. It's just like, it blows my mind what my father was thinking. I don't know. Takes me out there with my mom. My mom's pregnant with her 12th child. No, her 11th child. And he tells me, get in the back of the ton truck. I said, what's going on? I said, okay, yes, sir. And get in there. And then he tells me, is it true that David hugged you? And I said, yes, it's true. So then he tells me he's going to whip me. So instead of just spanking me, whatever, he decides to lash me, which I call lashing because he whacked me over my back and it kind of broke the skin on the sides of my ribs.
Jeez.
And he had me spread my hands out wide as far as they could on the back of this, what would be the bed that goes over the cab of the truck. So it exposed my whole back. And then that's where he gave me my lashings. He told me I was going to get 15 of them. And this is such a profound message. I think it's helped me it's going to sound weird, but it's helped me be a good mother. And this is why. So anyways, so he gives me these lashings and he gets to, I think he's down to 12. And I say, and he stops. I can hear that he's putting his belt back on. So then something in me broke. Can't even explain how it happened, but I felt like an indignant, strong power in my gut. And I turned and looked at him, and I never as much as said anything but yes, sir, to my father. And I turned and looked at him and I said, you lack 3 more with this strength. Obviously, I'd been bawling, probably screaming out, Daddy, no more in the first 3 or 4, And when I did that, my father is putting his belt on. I looked him in the eyes and he said, no, sister, you've had enough. And he's putting his belt on. And I never forgot that. And the message was that you can work with your children, especially teenagers, through reasoning and teaching and communication. And if you try to use force, it will backfire on you. So everything he was trying to do to me at that time backfired on him, because then I decided to marry this man and marry young, that I was getting out. And I made that decision that day. As I was healing from my wounds that night, couldn't sit down, couldn't lay on my back, one of my half-brothers go missing that same day. And that night, the soldiers and everybody are out looking for him everywhere. I did not go to look for him because I could hardly move. And the next day, we went into the prayer meeting. My father's there, and he calls me over, and I knew he felt punished by what he'd put me through. Now, looking back on it, I feel like he had to calculate it all. He had to make sure Mom Velma wasn't around. He couldn't do it at Mom's house. The kids would be around. He calculated it all. He knew I was going to scream, so he took me far enough away where no one could hear me scream. And I think now looking back, I feel like my mom had mentioned to me she was thinking of leaving him during that time. And I feel like he used that dramatic scene to strike fear in her in case she was thinking of leaving. I think there was a lot more going on than what the little girl knew. And so I feel like it was something, because he made her watch, and I think it was something these are my kids. God gave them to me. If you leave me, I'm going to keep your kids. And that's what she could expect. And my mom and I were really, really close. She never spanked me once in all my life, ever. I probably needed it, but she didn't give me any spankings. But she was her and I were really close. And I think that she couldn't bear that, and it kept her in line for a while longer after that all went down. Because when it went on, none of it made sense. He didn't need to go to that extreme. But needless to say, something in me broke, and I decided to marry the man that I married that day.
And besides the racism, they didn't want you to marry him because he was from the other side of the breakoff, right? The Ervil side.
He was actually from Alma's side, not Ervil, Alma's side.
Okay.
So Alma was another one of the brothers when all the breakoffs all happened, and he went off and he was the bishop of the church, and he started his Zion's camp. And every one of these brothers were waiting for the prophet to come back and give them the authority. So he was going to wait and said it will come to him. They called him rebellious. And in that family, I don't know for sure, but I feel like something went on because this guy hated women. But I didn't know that at the time. So then I married into the misogynistic part of the church. And that's where David had come from. But at the time, I didn't know. All I could see is I'm not going to get hit because they don't hit their kids. And I'm not going to go hungry because they have food. So those are the two reasons why I chose the father of my kids. Not to mention he was half Mexican and kind of a little sexy looking thing. But I didn't.
Right. I was so hopeful for you because I'm reading the book and I'm like, oh, wow, he's so attractive.
Yes, he
He's
was.
showering you with love and praise. Little did you know it was 100% love bombing and the immediate switch. My heart broke for you when you're planning the wedding and everything's all giddy. And imagine, I mean, I'm imagining being 15. I was so boy crazy. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get
Yeah.
married and planning my wedding and the whole thing. I'm gonna plan my wedding night. This is the lingerie I'm gonna wear because
Oh, I
sex.
was afraid of my wedding night.
So, well, I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that I
yeah.
was excited to be able to get to that point and be a quote woman. And so I'm feeling all of this for you while I'm reading the book. And then he says to you that he was going to bring a girl to your wedding who was a girl. And I was like, what?
Yep.
Bringing a girlfriend to your wedding?
Yep. He invited a 14-year-old girl to my wedding. He says, but don't you worry, Rena. That day will be all about you.
Oh my.
Obviously, he wasn't getting married. I was.
Right. That's what he said. He
Yep.
said, I'm not getting married. You're getting married.
Right.
You're going to belong to me, but I don't belong to you.
No.
And I'm just like, no, don't do it. But of course, you're stuck in a hard place because as you were talking about in your book, you didn't want to get married to one of these old creepy men as a third, fourth,
No.
fifth wife, whatever. You wanted to be attracted to the person you're marrying. He's older than you, but not that much older than you. And so you're seeing, okay, well, I can either stay home, continuously be a mother to my siblings, which I know you love doing,
Yeah.
but you're also facing the horrendous abuse of your father. You're in a survival mode, and this seems like the best option. So, of course, you're going to ignore the red flags. You know, he loves me. It's fine. Everything's going to be fine. You knew being a plural wife was coming, but you come home from your honeymoon. And the first thing he says is,
he's going to start dating now. He's ready. To paint a little picture of what he looked like, he had long hair, kind of wavy, thick, long hair. He wore those silk shirts and left the front unbuttoned. He wore those hip hugger jeans and he smoked weed. He was a wild kid. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, he'll have one wife if he has to go to heaven. But boy, was I wrong. But at that moment, that's what I thought. I thought, he loves me so much. And he's so, he was constant pressuring me to do the naughty. And I was just going to go to heaven. So he just wanted me so bad that I'll be enough for him, and he'll do this plural marriage just so he can get to heaven. Well, I was duped. He already had a girlfriend. I remember spending my wedding or parts of my wedding looking for, there's several Hispanic people there. And I'm looking for, where's there a 14-year-old girl? Who could it be? I had no idea who it was. And I didn't put it together who it was. But and then we go off to the honeymoon. We take his aunt with us on our honeymoon, and I didn't know anything about the secrets of life, whatever. Figured it out, got back home, and he started dating. And the book doesn't even say some of the nonsense he did, but boy.
What's some of the nonsense he did? Tell
Well,
us.
we're newly married. We got married in March. This is in April. We go to San Diego where his brother lived, California, and we're going to do some shopping, get some stuff figured out, whatever. It's Sunday. We go to church. We come home from church. He liked to nap a lot, and he still naps a lot. I could tell some funny stories about that. But either way, so we lay down for a nap after church, and I wake up, and he's gone. At this point, no, I'm not expecting no. So he's gone, and I'm trying to find him. We're in California. I don't know what. And I'm starting to look. I ask his brother, do you know where David is? He says, nope, I haven't seen him. Everywhere I look, I can't find him. So I get this feeling that he's with a woman, but who knows who. So I start calling around. How did I figure out phone numbers? I don't know, but I called a Hafen family home. To this day, I don't like the lady because of what she did to me. So I call there, and the mom answers, and I ask, have you seen David? And she says, no, I haven't seen David. I said, okay, thank you. I'm just looking for him, whatever, bye. A couple hours go by, I call again. And I said, have you? And she answers, nope, I haven't seen him. And I'm getting scared now, thinking, it's been about 10 hours now. I can't find him. It's night now. I don't know where he is. Now it's 10 o'clock. It's 11 o'clock. I don't know where he is. So I finally call like 11:15 the house again. And now I'm panicking. And a sister wife answers. And she says, hey, whatever. And I tell her who I am. She goes, oh, I had a goat named Rena. So that really made me feel good. And then she said, oh, yeah, David was here. He's with Lorianne, and they've been out on a date. And I was just petrified. So I hung up the phone, took off my ring because that's what you do. Threw a fit. He got home like at 1 o'clock in the morning, shirt all unbuttoned and shoes in hand, never told me what he was up to. And that's how he was going to live polygamy. And anybody that knows how polygamy is to be lived, that is not how it's done. And he told me whatever the nonsense was is to keep me. But my only options was to go back home with mama and live around daddy. And I had just been gone for a month and I just couldn't do it. So I stayed and tried to work it out.
Right. And then the person that he tries to bring around, I liked how Delilah, is that how you say her name?
Yep.
She was like, I don't want to marry you. You just barely married her. And she was like, let's wait a little bit. And then she did end up becoming the second wife.
Yeah.
What was that relationship like between you guys?
She was older than me. She's Hispanic. There was a few hurdles in the whole thing we had to jump through, being the family that she came from, and I'm white. So my ex-husband was half Hispanic, half white, so he could play on both sides of the fence. He could be white when he wanted to, and he could be Hispanic when he wanted to. So on this situation, well, now he's Hispanic, and I'm the only white one. So there was a few things he had to promise and make sure that I wasn't his favorite, and that if someone had to go without shoes, it would be me, and if someone had to cook outside, that it would be me, because, his daughter deserved the best, whatever it was. And we appeased him, and he made me do whatever I had to do to get her in. But she was a really, really kind woman. And to the day I left, she always called me his wife, though she had, I think, 11 of his children. Whenever I was around, she made sure I sat by him or whatever she could figure out. And we became really good friends. And even when I ended up leaving, she several times asked me to come back, that she didn't want to be there without me because we had had such a friendship. I delivered a few of her babies, and she was a great girl. She treated me wonderful. And I'm thankful of all the options I had that she came along, even though she was a little older than me. And she really was good to my children. And she comes from integrity. And I never had to go barefoot, at least not for very long. And it wasn't because she needed the only pair of shoes. It's because I had big feet. So my ex-husband had me believe that no one made shoes the size of my feet. So I would wear his tennis shoes.
What?
Yeah, he had me to believe that. And it was all because he was afraid of me. Like, I was kind of powerful. So he'd constantly try to just keep me down. No matter what it was, I was able to overcome it and just keep going. That's how I became successful. As successful as I've become, I started since right after I married him. And there's a little story of almost everything I touched made money. And I had a way of doing it. So he'd kind of like humiliate, like, oh, you don't need the washing machine. There's one washing machine. Let me give it to the Hispanic girls because, you're white, and, I have to prove to them that you're not better, or whatever it was. And I'd always just go right through it and come out on the other side just stronger and creative. And as truly loved by the girls, I left, and most of his wives adored me, and delivered their babies, second mama of them, and yada, yada, yada. But she was a jewel.
I mean, you truly made the best out of all of your situations when you're talking about how you were pregnant with your first child, and you go from this beautiful home with running water to a literal sheep's pen.
Absolutely.
On the middle of this. I was like, what? Why now? Right when you're having a newborn,
Yep.
being put into this place with no running water, no electricity, when you had a home.
Well, he gave the home to his father, to the church, the United Order. and we moved to back to Chihuahua, where he was from, in with his mother. As I said that they were racist, she caused me a lot of heartache because I was white. And it wasn't personal about me. It was what her husband put her through. All the times he'd gone off on missions and came home with a white American wife, because she was Hispanic. So I think she didn't like that, the American women, because of that. And I think that I just was a reminder of that, because I don't think it was really personal to me, because we didn't have a relationship. I didn't know her, but she just didn't like white women. And I think it's because of what her husband, who was completely American, and I don't know how many women he married, 11, 12, 13, I don't know how many. And he'd come home with a new American wife all the time. And she just hated hated the Americans. And I think that that's why she was hard on me when I was there. So I move in with her. I end up having a preeclampsia and a new baby, 5 weeks early. And then they decided to kick us out of her house because they were going to remodel it. And we had nothing but a sheep pen on the property he had inherited from his father. So he went out there and poured in a cement floor and put up plastic on the windows and dug out the little tiny, I don't know what you call it, where the sheep would go in and out of the little pen. He dug it out and made it into a full-size door. And that was my home. No running water. He'd hook up his truck battery to a little cable, and that was the light bulb I had. And then he'd bring barrels of water in, and I would dig a hole in the ground and stand, because I'm so tall, stand in the hole of the ground with the wash tub on the ground and a washing board in it. And that's how I'd wash my kids' diapers and stuff. And I was just determined to make it work. It was tough.
Yeah.
And he kept me constantly in poverty and hungry. And his father had taught him that if you're going to have a wife, you need to treat her like a horse. You need to keep her, disciplined, and then make sure she's wanting for everything. Then she'll come to you. Anything that you could think of that a person needs, he'd make sure I just got enough to where I was wanting. And then he could have me come, can I have 2 bites of this, or can I have whatever? So I'd constantly come to him. And that's how he controlled me, at least at the time. Little did he know.
Oh,
That's how he kept me in
yeah.
check, and obviously perpetually pregnant.
It was so heartbreaking seeing the switch of him being so loving and kind to finding out that he was courting 3 women while you were pregnant, or how he would control what you wore and be so horrible to you. Took away your baking soda and salt because they were of the devil.
Yes, yes. My family had a really hard time with that because, all of a sudden they see this. I mean, I've been told by several of the family members, say, you were one of the most beautiful women in town and you became nothing because of his humiliation, and not nothing in my heart, but nothing to the eyes, however you say that, to look upon, because he did everything to take all that. Even lotion was of the devil, conditioner for your hair. I mean, toilet paper. He took everything from me, and I struggled for every little thing I did. And it was all either to keep me humiliated so he felt worthy of being married to me, or it was what his dad had taught him to keep me in check so he could go on to have more wives. Because if he had someone thinking for herself and being creative and having passion and talents and going out and changing the world or changing her home experience and environment, he couldn't control that.
Yeah.
So if he kept me believing that I didn't deserve anything and I was dumb was really an important thing to really drill into me, that I was illiterate, I was dumb, I knew nothing. And as long as he could keep me like that, but all I needed to know how to do was have babies and be a mama, and sew clothes, make bread. That's all I needed to do.
Yeah.
So he took books I wasn't allowed to read. I wasn't allowed to write. That was vanity. You don't need to be writing and using pens and paper. That was not necessary. So he tried to keep me in the bare necessities. And that was his way of controlling the situation, especially as he went on having more and more women. I think he had 14 girlfriends in the years that I was married to him, and he had been engaged to at least 11 altogether. And he had married 5 of them. And then, of course, myself.
Oh my gosh. I mean, he had the upper hand because you were a child when you married him, and your father literally told him, "Okay, well, you can marry her, but you're gonna have to finish raising her." I screamed out loud when I read that line in your book, and I was in the kitchen, and Jonathan's like, "What's going on?" And I was like, he just said. I was like,
Exactly.
I can't believe that. It's so
Yeah.
gross.
Yep, that's what he said, is that he had to raise me, and I was only 6 years younger than him. It's not like it was an old man. You could see if it was an old man, but yeah, basically saying that I hadn't been raised, and well, he took that literally, and he started raising me, and I was so tender. My mom she's an artist. She's a poet, writes music, and play any instrument. My mom had gone to college. My mom was the smartest person I ever knew. And my mom, when I think about her, she taught me so many things between her and I, as to being talented and learning how to love those parts of you. And then I marry someone who takes it all away. And I remember when 6 months into my marriage, I go down to visit her because now I'm pregnant with my first child. And I have long socks on with a long dress done with my hair in a ponytail holder, and everything is covered, and I'm chappy, and my hair is all just everything. We were poorer before, but now deliberately I look like I just fallen off of, I don't know, back in the, what is it, the 18th century or something, except I didn't have a bustier on. I would have looked a little better, but here I am, and my mom is just heartbroken. Like, what is he doing to you? And I just kept going. I just kept believing I could get through this. And it's an interesting thing about my story. I don't know if you saw it in the threads or not of the fabric of the book, but I would do anything for my kids and anything to get to heaven. I didn't care what it was. I kept going. And that even includes his children that I second mamaed a lot. But when I found out that what I was doing was hurting them, and they would end up being 5 little me's and 4 little hims, again, the second time in my life, I got the strength like you cannot imagine. And that's what it took to leave. Because if
Yeah.
it would have been about me, I could stay. The kids need mommy and daddy. The kid, I could continue that suffering, because that's all I ever knew was suffering and fear and struggle. And you're constantly trying to be enough. As you've read through my book, he made sure and let me know I would never be enough for him.
That was the other line that got me when he said, I'm ready to take another wife right after your honeymoon. And you're like, am I not enough? And he goes, no, you are not enough. I was like, oh,
Yep. And that
no.
was his word for word, that God made him such a man, that he needed so many women to fill
Oh,
this appetite he had. And I convinced myself that he would live polygamy because we needed to get to heaven, not because I wouldn't be enough. But he made sure and let me know it's because I wasn't enough. And that was the common thread. And I think that he was intimidated. I know towards the end of our marriage, I sat down when I was making my plans and stuff. And you have to do some psychological planning. You can do all the physical planning you want, but if you don't do some healing and get some understanding to build the strength that's going to take your mindset to take those steps, it's not going to happen. And I was starting to lay the foundation for that. And I asked him, one of the things I said to him is, I feel like you don't love me the same anymore. And I needed to hear that he didn't love me the same. He says, you know what, Rena, you're right. I don't. And that should have just pierced me. And I smiled at him and I said, yeah, I know. But in my mind says, mental note, we got that. He's not going to suffer once you leave because he doesn't love you the same. And one time we were going through the list of his wives, which I'm sure a lot of polygamists do this. And he started going through this list of his wives. So he started with the newest wife he had, and he called her by name and said, oh, I feel like we are equals. And then the next wife, he thinks, oh, she married up, and for whatever reason. And then he went through the list, and when he got to me, he says, and he's quiet for a while, and he says, I married up when it came to you. All of them married up, but I married up when it came to you. And I know he believed that. And in my heart, I thought, he said that because he knows he's not done the things to deserve what I had done for him. I had given him that family. I was the one running and keeping peace between all the wives. They all adore me. To this day, if any of them were on the show with us, they would all tell you the same. I'd have them tell me, you have so much power over this man. Why don't you use it? And I think, oh, because I want to go to heaven. I'm not going to, play these games or manipulate him or throw a fit or have a tantrum. No. But it all worked out great, obviously, as we sit here. But going through the stories, it was a lot of work. And I think that ultimately there was just this knowing in me. This knowing, I remember, it's so cliche, pregnant with my 5th child, and I'm gone out on a starry night there in the colony. The stars are beautiful. There's no city around. And looking at the stars and just knowing that there was something out there for me beyond what I was experiencing, not even knowing what it could be. But I just knew it. There was a knowing. And I just weathered the storm until I got to that point. And as I said earlier, that when I realized that my children would end up like him and like myself, I left.
Right. It was one of your oldest sons who said something to you, right? And said, Mom, I don't want to see you hurt anymore.
Yeah, when he said that, I thought he was worried about his braces. He's going to get his teeth pulled to fix some braces, or to fix his teeth, and he's going to wear braces. And so I come running to help him. What am I, 34 at the time or so? Swoop him in my arms. He's 16. And then he says, I don't want to see you like this anymore. It's hurting me. And when I heard that, I swear, same thing, like something here, like I woke up and thought, what are you doing? And then I decided to get ready to go. And I didn't know at what point I would die. And one of my beautiful sayings, it's in my book as well, is I had to be willing to die to leave that cult, because I was told you will die if you leave. Either the Herbalites will get you, I'll send out mugshots of you and they'll get you, whatever, God, especially God's going to smite you. That would merit the blood atonement. And I knew that that could possibly happen to me if I left. But on that day when my son said those words to me, something in me told me, if I die, at least I die trying to save my children. And so
Yeah.
the day that I left, I took my foot over that threshold. I looked up into heaven and I meant it. And I believed it. And I'm not a girl that talked to God all day long either. I just didn't know how to do that. I thought, well, he didn't listen to me. What did he care about what I had to say, But, because I'm wicked, whatever it was. So I put my toe out and I said, okay, God, I'm leaving, and like waiting and nothing's happening, right? And so then I walk over the threshold. I said, okay. Finally, I just told him, take my life. Take my life now. But until you do, I'm going to save my kids. And I left. And now, many years looking back, I realized that little girl did die. I did die that day. That quiet,
Wow.
soft-spoken, meek, scared, insecure, you're a woman, no one will love you, nothing. That little girl died that day. And I remember I feared it so bad, and yet it was the best thing that happened to me. But I didn't understand it. But yep, I left her behind. She died. She never went with me. We got in that car, I started to drive away, and the whole world was opening up, and I started the process of the
Oh my gosh. I want to talk about the escape story. First, I want to talk about your dad's redeeming moment. And I would say, probably one of, at least that you included in the book, the biggest moments for you stepping into your power and just giving it to your ex-husband, being like, no, Dad, this is what's going on. And it was such a cool moment to witness you standing up for yourself in front of your father, who we had seen did the most unspeakable things for just a side hug. And so I would love for you to talk about your experience with that and David's intentions taking you to your father.
Well, all the time I was married, David knew that I feared my father, so he used that against me constantly. If I didn't help him get another wife, I'm going to take you to your dad. He had me change the way I was dressing, so I no longer could wear pants. I no longer could wear so many things that I wore before. And if you don't obey me, I'll take you to your dad. So he constantly would say those words to me, and I was scared of my father. And so on this particular time, he tells me, I'm going to take you to your dad. And I told him, okay. And he was shocked when I said that. We set a time. I was going to Mom Velma's home, which Mom Velma is second mom, but a jewel. I adore that woman. But anyway, so I always felt safe with her and around her. So I start walking down that dusty road that I had walked down plenty of times back when I was little, and different things that I had gone through, and almost feel like you're having an out-of-body experience, kind of like you're watching yourself going to doomsday or whatever's happening. But I kept going. And I got there to Mom Velma's house. We went into the living room. Of course, my dad said hello to me. And granted, I had been married at that point for 18 years. And through all that time, I felt like my father was good to me. I didn't see him a whole lot, but anytime I did see him, he loved on my kids. And, it obviously was a different relationship. And I knew he had been sober for a lot of years. I knew that he had changed a lot. a lot of things in his life. So at that point, he tells me, come on in. I sit on the couch, and then he sits on the piano bench, and then David sits on a folding chair across the room from me, and Mom Velma's in the kitchen doing dishes. I'm just surprised how gutsy I was. And then Dad looks at me and says, okay, sister, tell me what's going on. So then I just started telling him everything that was happening. I just started telling him that, at that point, I suspected that my ex-husband had cheated on me or had gone off and slept with his brother's wife because his brother had passed away. I suspected something was going on. Now he's doing things that just didn't make sense for the church and the religion and the way we'd always done things. And now he's footloose and fancy free. And according to the beliefs, a man was not to marry a woman without the consent of the law of Sarah, which is his wife's. I knew something was going on. And by now, or had gone on, by now he's married to the woman. Now they're celebrating Christmas and a few things like that. And I'd had it. I'd had it with all the things he'd done, the neglect, the abuse. His brothers had made my life really hard. He did defend me. And now, granted, my kids are all getting older. So I start telling my dad. I can't remember everything I said, to be honest. Those are the basics. I have my eyes closed and I'm just going as fast as I can. And then he did this and then whatever, and I can't, and whatever I'm saying. And I open my eyes and I see that my father has tears running down his cheek. And that just first of all, that he heard me. And second of all, that he hurt for me was I was overcome with that for a moment there, I felt like I had been seen or that I mattered, right, for my dad. And then he goes on to talk to David about what was going on. And then according to the church, when a man raises his hands to the square, that means they're prophesying in the name of God. And he starts to prophesy. And he pretty much calls my ex-husband, husband at the time, to repentance and basically told him, you have caused my daughter nothing but suffering. And the fact that he had seen my suffering and noticed it and he didn't want that for me, and all that he had said about me being, David's first wife and all I had done for his other wives, and just on, I was just shocked. And I truly felt like God was prophesying because only God would know all these things. But obviously my father had been paying attention to the life I had lived. He basically called him to repentance, told him that if he didn't repent and treat me right, that he would lose me and that his whole family would fall apart.
Which, wow, because your husband dragged you there to get your father to punish you for not being a good wife.
Right. And then he ended up advocating for me. And not only me, one of the big things he said, if you cannot do this for my little girl, do it for your little girl. We had 3 little girls in a row. He was advocating, I think, for my daughters too. Maybe he couldn't advocate for me when I was little because of alcohol and the pressures of his belief, but when it came to my daughters, he wanted to make it right for them. I remember just never in my whole life feeling so protected, and I never felt that safety around my father ever. And to see that he actually was advocating, and he advocated for the marriage in the way that he gave some instructions to David to save the marriage. You have to do these things. If you do these things, I think you can reprimand the damage you've done. I think at the time there was some voting going on for president of the municipio, and one of his brothers was trying to get that position. This brother had raped one of his daughters, and I just told him, I cannot support him. I don't care if he's your brother. I cannot support him. And there was just a few things that were going on that I was standing up against, and that's why he was so mad at me, because I wouldn't just jump when he told me to jump and support him. I had a mind of my own, and I thought, I'm not raising my daughters around that. And I started advocating for my family. So that was another thing that he took to my father as my rebellion. It turned out beautiful. We left there. We went straight over to pray that one time and then never again. And he resented me because I had my father on my side. So he got worse. Then he took me to another meeting, obviously, with a brother of mine and a brother of his, and his brother, the same thing, told him off, says, you're mad at her for no reason. Later, it came up that he was mad that I had exercised my free will, and I actually was thinking for myself and sorting out things and coming up with my understanding of things, and he didn't like that, and he resented that in me. But that was the beginning of my journey to finding myself and to actually become as successful in and escaping the cult, healing from the cult, and becoming the businesswoman that I am today. It all started with that little standing up and not being afraid.
Finding your power, and especially finding power and support with someone who was originally a huge source of pain for you. It was great to see that he did stand up and help you get your documents ready so that you could cross the border, but then even that didn't matter. I was like, "No." Every time every time you would get one step forward, it seemed like you were getting two steps back in your escape story, and all of this is so time sensitive. Can you talk to everybody what it was like trying to escape into the United States without proper documentation in the middle of the night with $5 bill and 2 credit cards that you did not know how to use?
I just, looking back, I think had I not gone through it, I wouldn't have believed it. And sometimes I ask myself, but how? And it goes on to some other beliefs that I have about communication and how we actually receive the information and the things that we need. Sometimes we think it's because we studied it or we saw it somewhere or we called it somewhere. But I think that there's things that show up in our life when the timing's right. And I just see that that's how it was because I had no way to communicate to my kids and whatever. But as we traveled, we had 2 vehicles. I had all my children, except my oldest son had already left home and gone to Colorado to start working. It's a 4-hour drive to Juarez, Mexico, and that's where the consulate is. And I went there to see if the paperwork for my children had gone through because Mom Velma and my dad had already helped me gather the stuff and figure out everything to legalize my children because I'm an American citizen born abroad and I had lived in the United States for the big part. Yeah, I think you had to live like 7 years consecutively, and I had lived there for 11 years. So I went in, they called me, and nope, the paperwork's not ready. So at this point, I gave my only $5 bill to the man that let us park the 2 vehicles. And so now it's like I have these credit cards. Obviously, I had never used them before, much less in Mexico. And I go into a supermercado where you can get
Supermercado.
supermercado.
I know that one.
You got it. So I went to the supermercado and I went in and I asked them if they accepted that form of payment. She said yes. So I went around and I think about it lots of times. Why didn't I get more than what I got for food? But I think my mentality was still in such a scarce existence. I just got the basics, right? So I got the basics and was trained really well to buy distraction. So I bought 2 bags of oranges and then told the kids they couldn't eat that, but I gave them their bananas, milk, and bread, whatever it was. Fed the kids. We hadn't eaten because that was part of the whole thing, keep them hungry, and then they'll come to you for food as well. Anyways, I'm going all over the place. So we'll go back to the story. I finished that and found out that we wouldn't be able to cross the children with their legal paperwork. My kids are all little blondies. Well, I do have one that has a little darker hair. She's my oldest daughter. But other than that, we all look as American as you can look. So I assumed that that would help me. So I told the boys, you stay on the Mexican side. In an hour, get in one of the lines, the one that's furthest from the border, outside line, I guess you call it a line, and get into that line and start advancing so we can cross the border. But you wait an hour. So I went ahead of him, got in line, got up to, this is so, all the stories so true, but this I cannot believe happened, but it did. So we get there. I'm in my little red van and the officer comes up. First of all, he says, what is your citizenship? I told him what they were and he looks in at all my kids. And he looks, where'd you guys go? And we said a vacation because that's how we were trained. I mean, he had to know something. These are all little sunburned noses are peeling dirt under their nails, little braids on all my girls. He had to know we weren't on vacation, but he believed the story. And then he says, what are you bringing from Mexico? And I had learned that if you distract them, then they focus on the distraction and they let you go. And I had a driver's license. So I showed him my driver's license to show him who I was. And he says, what are you bringing? I said, oh, we just have, bread or whatever there and some oranges. And he says, oh, oranges, you can't take those across. So I had the kids reach around, grab the bag of oranges, give it to me, and I handed it to him and he dumped them in the garbage right there and he motioned us to go on through. So it worked and I had done that before. So it worked. I went 1 block, parked the vehicle. Now it's about 3, 4 o'clock in the evening. It's getting late. And I nursed my baby because I was still nursing her. I lock up the car. My oldest daughter is 14. I tell her, don't open the vehicle. Don't get out. Don't do anything. Just stay here till mommy gets back. They all agreed. I had a little red wallet. I don't know. I guess I put my driver's license in it and the 2 credit cards I had. And I walked back across the border into the Mexican side to go get my children because I knew I had a legal license. I could drive the vehicle. But silly me, and I don't know why I did this, I walked back in on the American side. You're supposed to walk in on the Mexican side, and then the Mexicans check your papers or whatever, and then they let you into their country. But silly me, I walked right back in on the American side, and the traffic, they're all walking into America, and I'm walking this way. And sure enough, there's McGuire, which was a border patrol who had just let us in, and he looks at me. He says, "What are you doing?" And I'm so silly because this is what I would say about everything. Oh, my husband. I always was trained to say, oh, my husband. So I didn't appear as a single, lonely woman. Anything happened, I'd say, oh, my husband's coming right back, or oh, my husband's over there, or whatever. This time I made up some story that my husband was on the Mexican side and that he didn't have a phone to call me and that I needed to go over and help him. I don't know how that made any sense. And he looked at me like, what are you doing? And he's like, why are you coming in here or whatever? He looks and he just told me, oh, just go, just go. So he let me go back. And so I keep walking on the American side and I look out the windows to see if I can see, because we're up kind of high, to see if I can see my kids' truck. I don't see it. So I get down ground level and start walking through and the sun is starting to go down a little. And I'm looking frantically for my boys. Sure enough, I see the truck. I run across. They're so excited to see me. I jump into the driver's side. They scoot on over and we go to drive through. As we get to the checkpoint, they let us in. Where are you coming from? I tell them where we're coming from. Same thing, vacation, whatever. But in this vehicle, I have all the luggage, which is 4 suitcases and some blankets. So he looks around and tells me whatever, great, everything's fine. Same thing. I had the second bag of oranges there. What are you bringing from Mexico? Oh, I have some oranges. Oh, you can't take those oranges in. So he takes them from me, throws them in the garbage, and goes to let us go. And then he says, oh, you got to go to secondary. So they ship us on over to secondary. We open the suitcases and take everything out so they can look through everything. And they're looking for, I don't know what they're looking for, but the glove box and whatever all. They found some medicine that I had for my daughter's diaper rash, and that didn't make sense. Why do you have this or whatever? And I made up some story. Anyways, and so just then we see the border patrol coming out with his German Shepherd, and it's that same McGuire. And I'm looking at him like, this can't be happening, God. This can't be happening. He comes and he has his German Shepherd. It was obvious smelling all these vehicles. Well, he brings it to smell and he sees me. And he pokes his head into the cab of the vehicle, and I can smell his stuff he has in his hair. And he looks right in my face. He says, you're up to something. And he probably, if he was around, he'd probably say he heard me. I don't know. But I was like, please. It's like that. That's like, I'm thinking I got to get to my kids. It's going to get dark.
Yeah.
They're alone. They're scared. And I just like, please. That's how I felt. And the dog tugged on his his leash at that moment. And he went out and then he continued what he was doing. He wasn't in charge of checking me. He was in charge of the dog checking for drugs. So due to that, thank goodness that dog yanked him away and he left, and then they blew a whistle and they had us line up and they pulled me out. I got across that border and down 1 block and made a right, dirt road thing, and there was my van. I could see that no one had touched it, and I never in my life felt like kissing the ground as I did that moment. The American soil, like I didn't know where I was going and what was going to happen, but at that moment we were all safe, we were sound, and I was free.
Yeah. Wow. And then you go, wait, now what?
Now what? So I knew,
How do we survive over here?
I don't even
8
think
children.
I thought that far. It was just almost like, okay, what's next? Well, I knew I was going to go to Utah because I was familiar with Utah. I'd been there several times working with my ex-husband in Pinette. So I knew the area, and I had raised one of his sisters as my daughter, and she was married and lived there. So I knew that if I needed her, I could figure something out. So I had a girlfriend that was there too. So we just headed that way. We stopped off, and in Utah and spent one night there, and the kids got in the pool. I still laugh when I think about it. They're wearing their long jeans and t-shirts and street clothes. I didn't know, you're supposed to keep your bodies covered up, and all my kids are in their street clothes in the pool. People are looking at us like, where did you guys come from? I didn't care. Just watching my kids swimming in this, clean pool. And now at this point, I'm swiping the cards and feeding them better. And I'm staying at a little hotel. They're turning the TV on. I thought at that moment, if they stop me now, I still have experienced freedom, even if it was only that much at that point.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So I think it was a few weeks when you finally got a hold, or David got a hold of you. Was that the first time someone had made contact from the Zion camp?
So when I was in Utah, I was around one of my nieces, and her dad is David's brother. His name is Nephi. So I was around her, so I still knew colony people were around there in Utah. So there was an Easter Sunday, took the kids to church, and then we went. It was nice to go to a little picnic. Got invited, and some of the colony people was there. And Nephi was there, and that's David's older brother, and he had his little cell phone, and he brought me the cell phone. He says, David wants to talk to you. So I had not gotten in contact with David. David had found his brother, and I happened to be there. He handed me the phone, and that's when I told him it was over and I wanted a divorce.
Which divorce, because you were not technically legally married. I thought it was so interesting, and I want to know if you know where this rule came from, that in order to be divorced, you just don't have to have sex, or you can't have sex for 7 months and then you're divorced?
So the way it works is you have to, for 6 months, you have to be, I guess you call it celibate, but not just physically, but also not entertain any suitors. Like I couldn't look for someone else or start dating or put my attention elsewhere. I had to be open to him and only him for 6 months and give him that opportunity to win me back in those 6 months. If he could win me back, then obviously our marriage would be fixed. So I knew the 6 months started that April. And so we were on that 6 months kick. But the good thing is he was in Mexico and I wouldn't have to see him that often. So it would make it a little more easier because all the manipulation, there's a lot of mind games that go on making you feel guilty. I'd gotten a cell phone and I didn't give my cell number to anybody because I wanted to just be my own self, thinking what I wanted to do and what was best for me. And it made it easier. Even though people loved me, I had a lot of loved ones and family members, people I really cared about. But I just didn't want them asking, what are you doing? Why are you there? Oh my God, all this stuff. There'd probably be a lot of them wanted to leave and they'd ask me, and at that point I was just too fragile trying to sort out what I was going to do. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have this plan. You're going to go and do all this stuff. I didn't know. It was just every single day. And I was so afraid of God that he was going to hurt one of my children and force me back. So I tried everything within my power to keep the kids safe on top of everything else. And then putting them in public school was the first time I ever put them in school. And that was so scary to me. And then a lightning bolt happens and a little girl gets killed on the blacktop at the school. One of my daughter's friends.
Actual lightning? She was actually struck by lightning.
Her name is Rachel Green. You can see her story in the newspaper from Salt Lake City. Anyway, so then my children's best friend gets killed. I get called into the school. The kids are in the trauma center with, whoever the trauma people are. They're trying to help all the kids. Something's happened, a tragedy. Long story short, this little girl gets killed. And my daughter was on the blacktop when this happened, but she had just got on the bus and the little girl was coming and she got struck. And another girl that was next to her also, but the one passed. So now right away, there's even footage of me being on, I guess is it Fox News? There's footage of me running to get my kids and my daughter's running to me screaming and you see me on the news going to get my children. And right away, I'm starting to feel that fear again and God's warning. And then I think this is going to sound so weird, but you'll probably get it. I thought, God, did you get the wrong child? Like,
oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness. You
literal, that's the one thing that everyone says when they leave a cult is waiting for God to strike me down. And you were just so close to that being your child. Imagine if that actually happened, aside from, of course, the immense and terrible grief that you would have felt from losing your child, but the fear of, did I make the wrong decision?
Well, that's true. And you can look up the news report. We talk about her all the time. And My daughter, I've never said this to my children, and now they're going to listen to this episode and know, but, and you understand what I'm trying to say. I didn't say, God, you got the wrong child. I would never, ever say that. I questioned, did he make a mistake? Because I was the one who left the cult. You're trying to hurt me because of my rebellion or whatever. And he missed my child. My child happened to be on the bus, or she said she just got on the bus. And she was waiting for her other little sister that was supposed to cut, but she hadn't got to the blacktop yet. And it was my middle child, nonetheless, her class, her grade that was going onto the bus at the moment that she got struck by lightning. And I'm over trying to research the news and find out if she lives, because they don't tell you right then that she's passed. They just airlifted her into the hospital. So we're watching and trying to figure it out. And sure enough, she had passed away. And they had a cute little memorial made for her on the school property. And you can still pull up the story. The other day we talked about it. But at that moment, since you're asked, we're talking about it, I honestly felt that God set out to get my child and he missed, which is silly all the way around. That's how scared I am at that point, and still trying to figure it out to get away.
Well, of course, because you haven't found that place of safety yet. You found freedom, but you're still running in ways. You're still trying to survive. You're still trying to figure out how to make money, how to support your kids, how to keep them safe in this new place that you haven't lived in since you were a child. And you're trying to navigate all of this as a mother. You're not in any sort of sense of safety. And there's so much we still need to talk about. Are you open to doing a second episode to talk about how it happened?
I absolutely am. I'm hoping we can fit it in 2 episodes, but if I keep telling these long stories, well, I'll probably have to take over your show with you for a little while. Here's my co-host. I'm kidding you.
Yes, I think it's so important to talk about once you actually found freedom, how you were able to navigate that and find that strength to create a $1 million business and how you're still navigating that today. I definitely don't want to skim through that. So let's end this episode with our Linda Listen moment, your sassy statement.
My sassy statement is, yeah, I was born a woman, but look at me go. Look at me fly. And I am more than enough for what I feel that I need to do. So eat your heart out. It's
Yes.
the biggest shocker. I'm a woman, and I can do hard things, and I'm so excited. And yeah, and for those that are listening who are going to tune in for the next part of this story, the hard part, the hard work starts then. It was easy up until right to this part of the story. It was easy.
Oh, wow.
If that's considered easy, it was easy.
And if anyone is interested, her book is The Dirt Beneath Our Door. I'll link that in the description, of course. And let's talk about where people can find you otherwise, your social media and your website.
So you can find me at pamelaspeaks.live. That's my website. You can send me a message, note, see some of the stuff that I'm doing and having fun with. And also I am engaging in a podcast called Wicked Confessions Uncensored, where myself and my baby sister, she's not a baby anymore, sister Vera, and we expose all the hypocrisies and secrets of the cult that we both escaped.
Oh, with Vera. I loved Vera in your story.
Yeah.
I wanted to hold and hug Vera because you talk about her being your baby, in quotes. She's your baby.
She's still my baby, and her and I got together, and we have 15 episodes of exposing hypocrisy and all that went on in the cult that we both escaped. So after I escaped, Vera left 3 years later, and I helped her figure that out once I did it.
Wow.
She has a part of the story that I don't, and I have a part of the story. It's what makes us do so good together. And she's also successful. She's also built a business. She has a couple of businesses and also an author. And we are just loving it. Just our mission is to get out there and showcase what you can do when you listen to that inner voice, that calling that you know, that knowing that says you were created for more than this. You don't have to know the whole picture. You just got to see what you can do today. And if nothing else is shifting a thought or believing that you have a purpose. And that's what her and I love doing. Obviously, we're both have a bunch of kids. They're all raised. We got all the grandkids craziness. But our favorite thing is sharing our story. And that's why I do what I do. I know one of my kids once told me, Mom, why don't you just gain some weight and go rock the grandkids? There's 30 of them. And I just think, sweetheart, that sounds lovely. I said, but I can't. I have to answer this calling. And I got to tell my story to inspire others that no matter how dire the situation appears and feels, that there is hope and you have what it takes. You don't have to have that. I'm not saying it's not good. It's useful to have education. It's useful to have family. All this stuff is great. But you internally have what it takes to live the life that you want to live, regardless of what has happened to you. And I even say for you.
Yes, beautifully spoken. And I'm excited for part 2. What people can expect is how she was able to, with only $5 and a couple credit cards and 8 children, build $1 million business, how you were able to deconstruct and find that safety and find that success, find that inner strength and inner voice, and how you got to where you are today. So stay tuned, guys. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
I can't wait. And until next episode, you can do hard things. Maybe. I know
Yes,
you
that's a good one to listen.
You can do hard
You can do hard
You
things.
can.
I say that to my daughter all the time. I'm like, I know it's hard, but you can do hard things. It's so good. So, guys, if you're watching, make sure to leave those comments, words of encouragement down below for Pamela. It means so much to us and our guests, helps boost the algorithm, even if it's a simple emoji, liking, of course, subscribing, sending this to other people as well. If you want to support further, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We have some merch at cults2consciousness.com. We are going to Mexico ourselves if you're interested at the end of October, going to the southern coast of Mexico. And if you like this episode, we have been doing quite a few episodes on polygamous Mormonism, fundamentalist Mormonism. You can check those out. We just did some on the AUB, Daughters of the Prophet. Make sure to look into those. And of course, stay tuned for part 2. And until next time, I'll link to more down here below. Follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.